Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It is Friday, August 26th. We're recording this on Thursday. We're just spacing out the episodes a little bit because of the unusual schedule this week. Derek Van Riper here with Eno Saris on this episode, a grab bag of topics. I hinted at the possibility of this on our last episode. We're going to talk about some tough late season decisions that we have to make with our rosters. In-season management this time of year is a little bit different, but it's also tricky for a multitude of reasons. We'll dig into some of those problems that we're currently experiencing and fighting against in our various leagues. We are going to have an installment of Prospect of the Week, which I know people are always excited about. We're going to take a look at some possible help at the first base position, where we've had a few injuries recently and a few longer-term underperformers that you might finally be ready to move on from. We've got some mailbag questions to get to, and I think Eno found some interesting stuff about Cade Cavalli upon a little extra digging around since our last episode. So we begin with the tough late season decisions. What is giving you grief as you try and set your lineups each week on Mondays and Fridays? You know, what are the most difficult things that you have to decide on as you round out a lineup?
The worst is when you have needs in diametrically opposed categories. You know, so in one of my leagues, I could probably get 3 standing points if I went after Ks, and I could get 3 standing points if I went after saves. And that's probably the worst 2 categories to have needs in, because they are opposed to one another. You like, especially in something like NFBC, you have a roster slot that you can either go to a closer that's going to get you fewer Ks, or you can go to a starter that can get you more Ks but no saves. And then on top of that, on the wire, there's nothing worse than trying to go for Ks and saves. I think, at least in this part of the season, looking at the streaming options out there, I've been really underwhelmed by streaming options this year. I, in fact, willingly rostered TJ Zoik for this week in 2 NFBC teams because I thought he'd be a 2-starter. Then on Monday, when I'm setting my lineups, he gets sent down, and I get super mad that he got sent down because he's not a 2-starter anymore. Then I put in some other guys, Taiwan Walker at New York. I don't think I used Bumgarner at Minnesota, but that sort of stuff where I'm like, oh, all right, I got to use these other guys I wasn't planning on using. And then TJ Zoik comes back up, and I'm actually mad that he comes back up because he's actually going to get a start. And then he gives up 6 runs, and I'm mad that I even cared about TJ Zoik.
Yeah.
So anyway, I am thinking about a little bit of a different strategy next year in NFBC in particular, but this is relevant to people with short benches and sort of 15-team depth, is that I want to have more of my bench be starting pitchers, because I've realized that, especially in the deeper 15-teamers, somebody like Madison Bumgarner, who I did not want to start this week at Minnesota. I hope I didn't. I don't think I did. But somebody like him is not available when you want to go find a streamer, because he's on someone else's team as a team streamer option, as Paul Spohr puts it. Good old friend Paul Spohr at Sleeper the Bust calls it team streaming, because you don't play that guy every week, but you do leave him on your bench. You don't drop him all the way. He's not a full streamer. And so I would like to ideally come out of the draft with, and I think also a bench reliever is a poor proposition. Maybe out of the first week, just to see if he gets anointed closer or not, in spring training. But I think I would like to come out of drafts with 4 out of my 6 bench slots being starting pitchers. It's a little bit of something that Derek Carty does at Labor. Mm-hmm. If you've noticed, his entire reserve round situation in NL Labor is all pitchers.
Yeah, I think I've lived that experience you described in a situation where the benefit of going heavy with bats in the roster construction was having an amazing offense. This is in the NFBC auction league, the big auction league I'm playing in this year, doing great in the offensive categories. And what I failed to do was build the bench around that core roster correctly. I had too much depth all season behind all my bats. So I was never losing playing time with my hitters, but I think I was wasting production on the bench because I had 4 hitters and 3 pitchers. And earlier in the season, when I was still trying to find saves, I was burning spots trying to get relievers that were going to get saves. So I probably had 1 to 2 extra pitchers. And then one of my first 2 pitchers, Walker Buehler, suffered a season-ending injury. And I didn't have enough starting pitching to begin with. And then
so
because
you held him for a while
missing,
to find out what the information was.
Yeah, I think I made a pretty quick cut on him, but
okay.
But what I ran into was that the in-season problem you're describing, the quality of the pitchers that are available most weeks for streaming purposes are pretty low. There have been pitchers that have emerged on the wire, but I would have rather.
Then you don't want to drop them. Sometimes then they end up on your team, and you don't want to drop them after they have a good 2 weeks, that 2-star week.
Yeah. So I've never fully rallied from that part of the roster construction flaw, not taking enough depth pitchers up top and having to chase on the bottom of the roster with really mediocre arms. It's reflected in my ratios. My ratios are terrible in that league. I have plenty of points I could make up if I could find good ratios. I'm having a hard time finding good ratios.
Yeah, bulk good ratio. Get bulk good ratios for the last month.
Get great ERA and WHIP and close the gap on the teams that have like a 3.80
Not from like a middle
ERA.
reliever. That's not going to give you enough bulk.
Not enough. So I might sit down today and figure out what exactly I would have to do to vault myself up a handful of points in the standings in both ratios categories just to see, and I'll know how unrealistic it is.
Maybe you could bench a bulk mediocre pitcher for a middle reliever and thereby take away the bulk bad and put in some small good.
That was suggested by a friend of ours, I think back in June, July. He pointed out, he said, you could really start throwing the bulk relievers who, if you look at the schedule and see the guys that didn't pitch over the weekend, you might get them twice in a week. You might be able to stream the bulk relievers for 2 appearances.
One thing I've noticed about bulk relievers, though, they're not staying bulk relievers.
Right.
Keegan Aiken is a one inning guy now. And Will Crow is a 1 inning guy now. So who are the bulk relievers?
Short list. I've mentioned Ronaldo Lopez a million times.
Colin McHugh.
It's not enough. There aren't enough guys there. I think it's something you could do, but the process for finding those players is very granular and time consuming, and you're still not optimizing the roster. You're still likely short in terms of innings in a typical week compared to what a starter can give you. You're capping yourself. Those bulk relievers can't be 2-start pitchers, so they'll never get you 10 innings in a week. So that's out. And they rarely become full-time starters because they usually used to be starters and they're now bulk relievers because it's been proven they can't handle getting the lineup a third time. So all this is to say, like the corrective action here, if you feel like you've been chasing pitching all season or you're having tough pitching decisions to make, you need to find a way to have more flexibility on your roster. You need more multi-position eligible players, because doing that means you don't have to have a backup corner and a backup middle and a backup outfielder and maybe even a backup catcher, depending on who your catchers are. I think there's some roster construction things you can push toward that change the way you build that bench. I think if you cheap out on catchers, you're more likely to roster a third one. I think if you pay up for catchers, you don't need to bother with a third one because the waiver wire is fine. Like if you're short for part of a week because one of your catchers got hurt midweek, the 0 compared to the waiver wire catcher in a 2-catcher 15-team league, that's not going to hurt you that badly. And you were getting a massive advantage.
Might even be better than some of the catchers out there.
Yeah. So,
but I do agree with you. Like, the multi-eligible is actually not just a thing for drafting a hole because, you do, especially in weekly leagues, you do want to have backups on your roster. Because it's awful if you get an injury on Tuesday at a position you don't have a backup and you take 5 days of 0 at a position that other than catcher. That's really bad. That's a lot of days you fall behind other teams. And that's why it's nice to have the Friday change. But if you don't have a backup on your roster, you don't have someone you can you can put in midweek. Yeah, it's pretty specific to NFBC, but I do think the deeper your league is, the better it is to have multi-positional guys. I know in my mono league in AL Labor, it's been really useful to have like Hunter Dozier, who's a first baseman, third baseman, outfielder. I've moved him around a fair amount, and he plugged in at third when Moncada went out, and he's been very useful to me on that first place team. Even though Ian Khan, it's just hanging around a little bit too much, making me nervous. Don't like that. But
he's
anyway,
in your head. He's been in your head all week.
A little bit less important in like a 10-team league, right? Like, because if you have an injury, especially if it's 10-team daily, if you have an injury, you can go get somebody.
Yeah, for sure. So these late season decisions when you're stuck between, you're still chasing saves and bulk, those can be particularly difficult because you have to choose, is it 6 and 3, is it 7 and 2 in terms of starters versus relievers? And how much will that cost you if the schedule's not giving you enough 2-start pitchers that week? That might be the thing that leads you to go with the extra starter. If you have a lot of 2-start pitchers, maybe that affords you the flexibility, the extra reliever. But we end up with these decisions that are not easy. And I think they're what make the game fun because there's not always a clear and obvious path forward. Sometimes you just have to choose similar or equal, near equal sorts of options. I think the funny example of late season management that is more of like a add drop sort of thing is Phil Dussault tweeted about this. He dropped Josh Hader in the main event, a 15-team league, the NFBC main event. And this was actually in Ian's league. So I think Ian and Rob Mershak were the duo that picked Hader up on waivers over the weekend, which is very layered. But I think the thing about choosing to drop a player like Hader, it has everything to do, I think, with where you're sitting in the standings and what your needs are. So I haven't seen Phil's particular standings in this league, but I can imagine being in a situation where maybe I'm just locked into my spot in saves, or I can only gain a point or two in saves, and I can't really lose much there. So I'm going to push another starter in my lineup anyway. I'm going to go from 7 and 2 to 8 and 1 because wins and Ks have the greater potential growth for standings points. I think that almost can overwrite who you think the player is going to be for the better part of what's left of the season. We're talking about a month plus now. So with Hader specifically, he gets this temporary demotion. He's probably going to get his job back before the end of the season. I would say it's more likely that he keeps it. Even if you believe that, if it takes a week or two for that to happen, he's not useful to you for a week or two. He's not getting you the one thing that he was supposed to be getting you the whole time. And someone else in that spot makes you better. So I can rationalize a decision like that, even though it's really hard to bring yourself to the point where you drop a player that was either a really early pick or even someone that you still believe in.
Yeah. The thing is, though, you have to stay afloat sometimes. Maybe he's just locked into saves, but for me, in my main, I'm actually second. Woohoo! I jumped up to second. It's really tight between me and third and fourth, and mostly third and fourth. So I could end up anywhere from second to fourth. I think first has got this wrapped up. I want to place in my first main ever. And so I'm all aboard. I think I'm locked into K's actually. It's 34 to the next one, and it's 22 to the one behind me, right? It's fairly locked in, right?
Yeah.
But wins are awful. Oh my God. If I had 4 more wins, I would have 4 more standing points. And I would actually be leapfrogging some guys who I'm battling. So it'd be even more than that. And I'm only 1 save up on one of the guys behind me in saves. Like, what do you do there? Because I could easily be like, okay, screw the 2 starters, right? I don't need the Ks. I'm not going anywhere in the Ks. But I can't because of wins. Oh, man. So this week in that league, I did pick up TJ Zoik. And I had a choice of Madison Bumgarner at the White Sox or Taijuan Walker at the Yankees. because TJ Zoic didn't come through. And I chose Taijuan Walker. I think that was probably the right choice. But that's the sort of decision-making process I have to go through. And I have Bednar on my bench. When Bednar comes back, I will have the choice between Bednar, Ian Kennedy, and one of the starters every week. And it's just going to be a feeling out process, really.
I think Bednar's probably over Ian Kennedy, probably the easy call for that spot.
So, I mean, healthy, right? So it's really about Ian Kennedy versus my worst starter.
Yeah. That's what it comes down to sometimes, and just being right. I mean, the TJ Zoic situation is just brutal, though. That's not a guy you want to have in the mix at all this time of year.
Desperation, man. It's what happens. But I don't want to give short shrift to the batting side. It's interesting that, so for example, in this league, home runs, if I need home runs, if I get 3 more home runs, I beat someone, I get to beat the guy who's in third right now. I take a point away from him and I gain a point. Really important. 3 home runs. Need that. The guy behind me is 1 home run. Guy behind me is 3 home runs. So it's like we're all trying to get home runs. I don't need stolen bases. I have 116. The guy behind me is 109. The first guy is 132, right? I don't need stolen bases. So you go over to your set lineup page. You say, okay, I don't need stolen bases. I need home runs. And you've got, Bryson Stott versus Mike Yastrzemski versus JJ Bleday. And you're like, and this was early in the week. That might be easier for the late in the week, but early in the week, the choice was Bryson Stott at home against Cincinnati for 4, or JJ Bleday at Oakland for 3. You're like, oh, well, Bleday is like a little bit more likely to hit homers, but not in Oakland. And I had Austin Hayes at home for 3 against the White Sox. I do one last time want to talk about, like, the Razzball tools are super useful, because they not only project a value where you can say, okay, the overall value of Stott at home for 4 against Cincinnati is much better than it is for Bleday and Hayes and Yastrzemski for 2 at Detroit. But you can also look at component things and see how many homers you might be giving up in terms of projections, right? Mm-hmm. So it projected Bryson Stott for like 0.5 homers or 0.2 homers and Bleday for like 0.3. And I'm like, well, I'd rather take the overall goodness of Bryson Stott, because, there are other parts of the standings where I don't want to fall back, like in terms of, runs and RBI and playing time. Like RBI, I need 3 RBI to take a point away from somebody I'm battling with, Mm-hmm. So all these things are interconnected, and it's not always like, oh, just put in Bleday and go all for the homers because, you could get somewhere in homers. Well, if I get that point in homers and lose a point in RBI, then I'm where I started.
I'm playing that game in a few different places right now, but for me, it's been more on the pitching side than on the hitting side, because my teams, when I had control, I was overdrafting hitting, and I don't like the way the end game has played out for that as much as you'd like. I would like to have a little more balance, or possibly try the other direction for the reasons that we mentioned. I feel like the bats you can find in season are a little better. They're a little more predictable. They're a little bit less terrible, seemingly, than some of the late season streaming pitchers.
We have some tools like barrel rate, where like early in the season, you can see someone who's just barreling really well, and like 2 or 3 weeks in, you can be like, well, we're almost there for barrel rate. I'm going to take a chance on this guy and find somebody. And, I feel like you can use stuff and Pitching Plus to kind of do that with pitchers. But they're also very schedule dependent in a way that I think barrel rate is not as schedule dependent. It's just like that guy's barreling it, whereas a guy who has like 100 Pitching Plus, that's like average. That's okay. But against a bunch of bad opponents, he'll look better than that. And against some good opponents, he'll look worse than that. The other thing that I wanted to say is I don't think that I'm being convinced that I want to take like 2 starting pitchers in the first 2 rounds, or that I want to take 5 starting pitchers in those first 7 rounds or something. I'm not being convinced that I need to alter my strategy drastically in that regard. But one more pitcher in the first 5 rounds, maybe, like try to come out with 3 in the first 6 or something, or 4 in the first 7, where it's just one more piece of bite at the apple with early starting pitchers as opposed to late. Because there's usually also a fair amount of late bat sleepers that I like, and it's true for pitchers too. But I don't know. There's been my pitching staffs are still not as good as I'd like them to be.
Yeah, living that in a league right now that is very important to me, and it is frustrating to say the least. Let's move on to some other topics. How about Jared Walsh? I think there's a simple question to be asked with him. What went wrong, and could we have seen this coming? Because at a glance, I can honestly say no, I did not see this coming. I had no real reservations about Jared Walsh as kind of a pick 100 to 130 range sort of a guy. I think he was kind of a fringy top 10 first baseman by ADP and by most people's projections and expectations. But the K rate went up this year. The walk rate came down. The power has been sliced almost in half in terms of the home run output. 29 homers a year ago. He's at 15 right now through 118 games. And his season might be coming to a close due to an injury as well, because he has been diagnosed with thoracic outlet syndrome. So maybe this is all just injury. Maybe the injury is the explanation we were looking for. But were there any warning signs in the profile that pointed to a massive drop otherwise?
I suppose he did not have great plate discipline stats. He's been sort of average-ish when it comes to chase rate. And that seems to be exacerbated in his 30% strikeout rate, which of course could also be injury. But if he's making poor swing decisions, the fact that his barrel rate is down, but it's comparable. His max EV is down, but it's comparable. Suggests that maybe if there's anything other than injury, it's poor plate discipline that has caused a little bit of this erosion. I don't know. Also, I guess there's a question of how much track record do we really have? We had one season of good work, and then 108 plate appearances of a good barrel rate from 2020. And between those, it felt like we could extrapolate that he'd be good. The barrel rate was good. But I wonder if the chase rate was a bit of a warning sign. And then the last thing is he never had good splits. He wasn't really playing against lefties because he had poor splits against lefties. Now, you want way more sample to believe in a thing like that. But when you see a team sitting a guy against lefties, when he was basically healthy all season in 2021 and only got 585 plate appearances, I think that's a little bit of a yellow sign, a yellow light. So you got the yellow light on the usage and a yellow light on the chase rate. But there's nothing here that when I look back, I say that's a red light.
Yeah, that's how I've been looking at it with Walsh so far this year. And again, maybe the injury is a big part of the explanation, but I do think the first base breakouts, these unexpected, these kind of non-prospects that emerge to take over either a large side platoon role or possibly an everyday role. I think Luke Voit probably fits into this mold. Injuries really slowed him down. Rowdy's kind of like that. Jesus Aguilar a few years ago. It's not just all lefties or anything. It's some lefties, it's some righties. They seem to be really fast peak players. There's something about this player type, the athleticism, the swing decisions, some combination of those things, or the tools as a whole that lead these players to reach a quick peak where they're middle third of the order, run producers for about 2 to 3 seasons at the high end most times, and then it's a reasonably quick drop. And I know it's maybe too general, but
age. No, but the age is, you're right. Age was another yellow light. That's what you're basically saying, right?
I guess, yeah, it's the arrival. Yeah, it's arriving at 25. Like that's usually not going to,
but also
hold for very long.
Not playing every day till 28. And I think this is how I think of it. And I might be wrong. I've had some arguments with people where they've made some compelling counter arguments. But so there's a curve, and I'm doing this on YouTube. But there's a curve of an aging curve. Of this is how good you are.
I was just watching that the other night.
So there's a curve with the peak of how good you are, right? And let's say there's a line here that's like starting every day in baseball. And let's say you start playing at 19 in baseball, and you start playing every day at 19. That means you have all this aging left, and you're playing. And this is like the level of where everyday playing is, right? But let's say you start playing at 29. I think this is your peak. You're at your peak basically, and your peak is just barely good enough to play every day. Isn't that what you're kind of saying?
Yeah. So
your peak is just barely good enough to play every day. Think of that with like Brandon Drury or any of these guys. Your peak is
late 20s.
You are peaking.
You're only going to decline if you arrive in your late 20s. If you come in at least in your mid 20s, you might hit the peak or be at the peak for a little while and then eventually start tapering off.
But like a 28, 29-year-old pop-up, you're like by definition, you're post-peak. But let's say you're personally peaking. And you're personally peaking, you're only going to get worse after that. And your personal peak was just good enough to be a major league regular. and I'm not trying to be rude to players. Like that's obviously a little bit rude. But it's also a fact of life that if you do pick up some of these guys that have late peaks, you'll see like Whit Merrifield was a bit of a late call up that signed a deal because he was like, I think his agent saw the writing on the wall, like not necessarily someone who's going to play till he's 38. You know who plays till he's 38? Albert Pujols, who's like up at 20. You know what I mean? That's who plays till 38. These other guys are going to play till they're 31, 32. So that's something to think about, I think, when you think about drafting Brandon Drury like next year. Like who are the next Jared Walshes? I think Rowdy. Let me see how old he is.
Yeah, who are the next Jared Walshes?
Rowdy is 27. However, this is the first year he will even put up one win above replacement. So as much as you like Rowdy, now's the time to trade him in Dynasty, I think. Who are some other? How would we find breakouts that are old? Let's just do 26 to 28-year-old WAR leaderboard, and just see if we can pick any out. Let's do 27 to 29. I think Brandon Drury is one for sure. Who's new on this? Is Tommy Edman? No, he's been playing for a while.
No, my fun Tommy
Edman Garcia.
Yeah,
Garcia. It's one little sort of yellow light. I mean, there's a red light for Adolis Garcia, which is play discipline. The yellow light is late breakout.
Yeah, I missed out on him this year for pretty much all of these reasons.
Ward, dude. He's one on his own team.
Or Angel.
Santiago Espinal. Already showing some warts anyway.
We're at the point in the season, though, where a lot of the players that we're talking about, they're emerging right now. Because if you were looking for first base help, it's mostly older players getting the chance for the first time. A handful of exceptions.
I think that's actually another yellow light for him is his position. Because how do major league teams treat first base? We're going to find
irreplaceable.
Yeah, we're going to find one. So, I think that's all useful, but maybe also useful for people listening and be to talk about some possible replacements. I don't know. We talked a little bit about Joey Meneses on the fantasy. What's that one called with Al Melchior, the fantasy?
The Fantasy Baseball Podcast.
Fantasy Baseball.
Athletic Fantasy Baseball Podcast.
Jeez, remember that one, Eno, you idiot.
Tough one.
Yeah, but we talked about Joey Meneses, and I was saying that he gives me Schwindel vibes, which sounds like super negative. But remember, Schwindel had a pretty good season last year, so I think Meneses is one of the better in-season pickups. But when you're talking about next year, he's exactly who we're talking about with Walsh, and even worse. He's got the same warts as Schwindel for next year. He's going to be a 31-year-old that has no plate discipline, makes a lot of contact, and may just regress just as bad as Schwindel. So it's a backhanded compliment, but it's still a compliment because I think he could have a decent end of season. And you maybe Meneses is owned in something like 10% of Yahoo leagues or something. So that's if you're in a deeper league. He's a pretty good option for deeper leagues.
I hope this is an easy concept to understand, but I think when you're talking about second half pickups, you don't have to like the player in the long run. You don't have to believe that it's a profile that sticks for next season because you're only playing for this
play
one.
For the Nationals, basically.
Will they keep playing him? Sure. Who's there to replace him? Teams that are playing out the string, especially when you're talking about the positions that are not that important to the organization in the long run, they'll leave the door open for Joey Meneses for the rest of the season. So I have no problem picking him up. If I need corner help, even in a 12-team league, if the playing time is there, we think the power's good enough, the lineup position's better than it should be because the team's a mess, that's fine for right now. But if you're telling me at pick 250 for 2023, do you want Joey Meneses as your corner? No, I don't. I didn't want Frank Schwindel. I don't like. I will lose to people who draft these players if these players are good for a full season. So I guess occasionally you do miss out on maybe an Aguilar or a Voit or some players like that can come through and stick around longer than expected. But this is generally the type of player that I'm very skeptical of, and I think it's for good reason.
And you could just look at usage to gain some eye into what's going on here, because I kind of think like a Lamont Wade Jr., who's available in as many leagues, I think he's probably a better long-term asset. Right now, he's hitting everything straight up in the air, and maybe he has some adjustments to make, but the walk rate, the strikeout rate, the power are good. It's all mostly BABIP. He's got a 0.50 BABIP in the last 2 weeks. However, even if Lamont Wade Jr. is a little bit better of a real life asset, he's had 35 plate appearances in the last 2 weeks. Meneses has had 52. So if you pick up Wade, you're just leaving a lot of plate appearances out on the table. And I like Isaac Paredes, 35 plate appearances. I like Josh Naylor better than all of these guys. And if you're in a daily league and you're looking to replace Jared Walsh's production, Josh Naylor is a great pickup because you can maybe pair him with somebody else and get that production. He's actually better than Walsh has been this year, but 38 plate appearances. So really, in order to replace Walsh, you got to have Josh Naylor and Isaac Paredes or Joey Meneses.
Yeah, I think Naylor would be kind of your best Jared Walsh replacement of this group. A little bit younger than a lot of the players we're talking about too, so more optimism there. I think Elharis Montero is kind of interesting. He's one of the players the Rockies got back in the Nolan Arenado deal with the Cardinals, and the home road problems for the Rockies are certainly going to be there for a young player. I know the strikeout rate's a little high right now, but we're talking about his first 100 career big league plate appearances, and he's controlled the strike zone well enough in the upper levels of the minor leagues where I don't have this expectation that Elharis Montero has bad swing decisions like cooked in.
It might just be sort of pressing to start a career. And also when you're hitting 255 and you have 4 homers, it's not obvious yet to you that that it's not working.
Yeah, you get a couple good results and you keep using the same approach. But I actually think that's a good profile if you're looking for someone that could have been maybe added in a keeper league or could be easily traded for in a deep format right now. I actually think Montero is a good target.
Yeah, and I was looking week to week at the schedule, and I was like, oh man, the Rockies are on a 10-day schedule, a 10-day away part of their schedule. This might not be the best time to pick them up. However, after this Mets thing this weekend, I think he goes to Cincinnati and Atlanta, which are not terrible places to be on the road. So if you're looking at a Sunday pickup, Montero for Monday after the Mets series, should be super cheap. And if you're kind of doing this thing where you're threading pickups, I say put Montero on it, like maybe he's not your number one guy. If Naylor's out there, you start with Naylor, but you can by putting Montero on for a buck at the bottom, you can make things easier for you if you don't get Naylor, like at least put him in the waiver claim bucket.
Part of the reason we're looking for first base help, aside from someone like Walsh, Vinny Pasquantino's hurt right now. Brandon Belt can't seem to shake the knee injury. Unfortunately, this might be nearing the end of the road for Belt, which is really kind of a sad way to see him go out.
I saw that from Andrew Baggerly, and I don't know if I fully agree. I can't. It's tough when you look at the underlying numbers, and they're exactly the same as they've been for years. He has a 12% walk rate for his career. He has a 12% walk rate this year. He has a 24% strikeout rate for his career. He's 27% this year. 11% swing strike, 13%. He has a 13% barrel rate this year. That would be the third best of his career. All these things seem to suggest that he's okay. And then he has a slightly bad BABIP, and he's been running like a 50% fly ball rate for a couple of years now, and he's just not turning those barrels into homers as much this year. I don't know. If I was another team that was looking for like an old DH next year on a 1-year deal, I might give Brandon Belt another try.
This is the part of the calendar when I start saying Oakland where could this player go next year and find lots of playing time and have just a clear path to maybe bouncing back if health works in their favor. I hope for Belt's sake it does. I mean, it'd be nice to see him continue to play because he seems to have core skills that are definitely good enough to produce, at least on the big side of a platoon.
I've been wondering if I should change my tune a little bit on the A's this year because they've undergone the process that they need to go through of sort of sorting through the veterans and trying out the young guys and seeing which pop-up guys are real. And, I no longer think that when I look out on the team, none of these players will be on the next good A's team. Because Nick Allen sometimes shows a little power. He's a little bit interesting. Shea Langoliers might be legit. He cut his strikeout rate again this year. And Seth Brown is not necessarily a building block piece. And he's a 30, so he might not be around either, but he is the type of guy that the A's find, so I'm softening my stance a little bit that this is out of the norm for the A's. This looks a little bit like 2015 when they were just trying to find guys and give guys opportunity on the field. So if that is the case and they start to invest a little bit more going forward, then Brandon Belt at DH next year is a total possibility.
I think they've got maybe 3 players for the next good A's team in the lineup right now between Murphy, Langoliers, and Laureano, and it seems unlikely that Murphy and Langoliers would both be there, but
and Laureano also seems like somebody they would
I don't trade. This is still a pretty rough teardown. I also think the Sean Murphy trade could bring them back quite a bit more than what they got back for Matt Chapman, though. So maybe that helps kind of fix the situation too. And they've got a lot riding on Gunnar Hoagland getting healthy, and so far the late stages of his rehab from Tommy John surgery are really encouraging. So if he comes back and flies up prospect lists and quickly becomes one of the best pitching prospects in the game, that would certainly help. But
they've got a pop up in Jordan Diaz. Is this a natural segue we're building towards?
I think it is.
Oh gosh, we're so good at this.
How did we do that? Yeah, Jordan. Did I mention Jordan Diaz as a previous prospect of the week?
It's possible. He has. I think we've talked about it before, but an intriguing combination of emerging power and good strikeout rate. I think the question is the power is just right on the cusp. When you have like a 190 ISO in the minors, I'm just like, I don't know, dude. Especially when it comes to the 52% ground ball rate. It's like, maybe he's just a good spray hitter, but I would know a lot more if I had his barrel rates.
I believe I did not use Jordan Diaz previously as a prospect of the week, so I'm going to go ahead and make him my prospect of the week.
Hey!
I'm going to do it because he was one of the players that when I was digging through the A's system a few weeks ago, I was impressed. I was like, this is legit. This is a guy that can actually help them long term. And Zach Geloff, I think, is probably the better corner infield prospect. They're going to probably move those guys around to make the pieces fit. So I don't know how defensively it all works eventually. That's a problem that the A's can solve. They got time to figure that one out.
No one really blocking them.
No one really blocking anybody. And unless you're a catcher, there's a pretty clear path to the roster wherever you really need it to be. Yeah, but a really nice season at AA. Nice to see him getting a late season look at AAA. And Jordan Diaz, probably a player that we're going to see in the big leagues at some point by the middle of 2023. I don't think that's unrealistic based on what he's been able to accomplish.
Yeah, and it's interesting to think about him versus Mark Vientos, a guy that we've talked a little bit about that's on the on the Mets, AAA roster right now. Vientos is a guy who walks more, strikes out more, and has more power. However, he's striking out 28 to 30% of the time. And even if he translated that exactly to the big leagues, he has less defensive value than Diaz, makes less contact. And in my opinion, hard pressed to outperform Diaz, especially when you're thinking about WAR versus, just just at the plate. But I think that's also meaningful because, WAR is what will give Diaz more playing time than Vientos. So I know that some people have Vientos high on their list, and I know I have a slight bias away from guys that strike out 30% of the time. And I saw Jarrett Seidler say some stuff on Twitter today about how the guys who strike out 30% in the major leagues did not strike out 30% in the minor leagues. They struck out, 24% in the minor leagues. And the guys who strike out 30% in the minor leagues don't usually make it to the big leagues.
No, they're up and down guys if they get there at all. It's a very tough skills flaw to overcome. Looking at the hard hit numbers for Jordan Diaz, 26.6% hard hit rate. That's based on the Sports Info Solutions number. I know the RotoWire player pages have that. I don't know if there's any other places where you can easily access that. So 26.6%. Those are graded by hand. So there's hard, medium, and soft.
But also, is that a good number?
It skews a little low, but the reason I wouldn't panic is, one, it is scored by video or by scout, so it's manual. It's not just pure like a StatCast sort of thing. Also, age to level. Diaz is young, right? I mean, he's 21, and he's now at AAA. So when you're talking about a player that young, it's less of a problem. He turned 22 a couple of weeks ago, but he's been 21 for most of this season.
His seasonal age is 21.
Yeah, Vientos, just by comparison, Mark Vientos, 29.1% hard hit rate. So kind of similar.
A tiny bit better, but not that much better.
No.
It's mostly just that he's hitting his balls in the air, whereas Diaz is hitting his balls on the ground.
Just for some other context, some guys who are really good in terms of hard hit rate based on how this is measured. Nolan Jones, 43.8% at AAA.
I continue to like him. If his demotion makes him available in your dynasty league, I would try and buy him.
Corbin Carroll, 39.2% hard hit rate.
That's
Kelnick, 38.3. Yeah. No,
I don't know. That's swing and miss, man.
Nolan Gorman pre-promotion at 38.1. Joe Adell, 38% for Joe Adell.
And this is like per ball in play, not per plate appearance.
Right.
Yeah. Spotted something.
Yeah, so those are the higher end guys, but you move through the list, you'll see plenty of guys that are in their late teens, early 20s that are lower in the range, but I still wouldn't consider that to be alarming.
I got a name for you to look up. How about Addison Barger? He is a 22-year-old infielder in Toronto in AA.
It's got him at 30% for a hard hit rate.
Okay, so better than Diaz and Vientos, but worse than the very upper echelon. I will buy it. Addison Barger, I think, has a really fascinating backstory. As I'll take him as my prospect of the week. He only has one write-up on Fangraphs from 2019 from Aaron Longenhagen and Kylie McDaniel, where it just says 40 hit tool, 40 power, bench bat. Then after that, he got popped for PEDs and missed some time in 2019. Then he had a fully missed season in 2020, and nobody thought of him again. When he came back in 2021, he hit for power, but he showed off that 40 hit tool with a 33% strikeout rate. People mostly still just wrote him off. Now at 22 years old, he has blown through high A and double A with the same WRC plus 150. He's showing off his power. He's cut his strikeout rate. He's really improved his contact rate, his contact quality against right-handers. He's a left-hander that can play third. He, even in the write-up from Longenhagen, has a plus arm. So I think he's going to stay at third. The strikeout rate is a little concerning, but I think he has enough power to make it work at 30%. And then I got a couple more pieces of interesting information that the swing decisions are still a little bit poor, but he crushes right-handers, and his batted ball velocities are basically elite for his level, according to more TrackMan-esque numbers. And that he was asked for at the trade deadline, and the team decided not to trade him. He's 40-man eligible. He needs to be put on the 40-man next year. So he's on the fast track to going to the Toronto, and it seems like the organization values him. So here's a guy that's coming out of nowhere that, steals a few bags, hits homers, may not have the best batting average, but even Steamer projects a 244 batting average and above average bat at the major leagues right now. And that's, Steamer's always going to be pessimistic, I think.
Yeah, I think with Barger too, I mean, being in an organization that looks like it's lined up for some long-term success, there's probably some big side platoon risk, but at least it's big side platoon risk.
At least it's big side. Yeah. Yeah, because if Toronto's really good, they may not want to call him up to play every day. They'll have maybe like an Espinal or somebody that can platoon with him. But I think there's still, even with Espinal's, advancement this year and added power, you've seen that they're playing him less and that he's become a little bit more of a small side platoon guy over the course of the season. So there is question of sort of what the long-term plan is with Espinal, Merrifield, and Chapman. Who's going to stick around? Who's going to go? And where might Barger step in?
Yeah, but a nice name, not someone that was on my radar at all when the season began. So good pull for your prospect of the week selection. We did talk about Cade Cavalli briefly on the last episode, and you were able to find some more stuff numbers on Cavalli. So I'm curious to know what you dug up.
Yeah, I remember that we actually ran, I forgot that he was at the Futures game last year. We had stuff numbers from the Futures game last year. It's a little bit small on YouTube, but if you look closely, Cade Cavalli had the fourth best stuff plus on his four-seam fastball in that game. And the only note of caution there is that Reed Detmers had a slightly better four-seam fastball stuff plus in that game. They are airing it out in a short one-inning stint. This is basically almost max stuff plus, for them. Reed Detmers now has a below-average major league four-seam fastball stuff plus. So it's still possible Cade Cavalli does not have a great four-seam. He also does not show up as impressive in any other pitch group except for cutter. He had the best cutter in the game. So it's an interesting collection of pitches where it's possible to change up his below average. And is he going to be a four-seam cutter slider guy? Is he going to be able to pull that off? So I think there's a fair amount of risk here, especially given his organization. But I did want to put him into context with some guys like Detmers and who did he have a better? He had a better cutter than Nick Lodolo. You see, I'm I'm trying to. Eyeball.
This is a weird quality artistic segment of this show that I didn't think we'd ever get to.
His slider rated as about average, about as much as good as Reed Detmers' slider. But that's interesting because that's also Reed Detmers' new old slider, if that makes sense. That was Reed Detmers' new slider that he has now turfed and gone back to his old slider since.
So I think it almost seems a little more optimistic than we were based on concerns about command specifically with Cade Cavalli. The good news is if you're thinking about picking him up in a redraft league, you get to watch the debut first. You get to see what it looks like. So that helps as well. Yeah. I think the glaring need for quality innings there gives him a nice job security floor. I think the innings from last season give him plenty of buffer to make it through September. So if he's pitching well, I don't think we're looking at a very early shutdown. I wouldn't treat Cavalli as much more than a matchup dependent starter from the jump. But in September, those guys can pop, right? You get a few lineups that are playing for the future, and maybe they've got to the point where a handful of stars are missing because of injuries. He pitches Friday. So I'm looking at the schedule.
So after that's Reds at home. That's decent.
If you first come first serve, I would use that.
2, 3, 4, 5.
Chasing starts in a first
A's
come, first
at
serve.
home.
Use that
Next Thursday. I like that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. At Cardinals.
Nope.
Borderline. No. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. At Phillies. Nope.
That's an easy. That's a 2-start week, isn't it? St. Louis and Philly.
Oh, so that might just be an avoid. That's a tough 2-starter.
That's either an avoid or your ratios are
toast anyway. So. I get back on the horse for Marlins at National September 18th. So could be a good early pickup for that A's start. And then you're going to have to make a decision for the double tap if he stays up. And then I get back on the horse. I bet you I pick him up after he's been dropped after the 2-start week for the Marlins start.
It's nice to know your own tendencies and have a plan. Seems like you got a pretty clear
I also
plan.
have no money left in most of my leagues. So if he's going to be a top pickup, I'm not going to get him. I did lose some money on Brett Beatty, just as an update. I lost Joey Votto in the main. And I did use my final mini hammer on Brett Beatty. I like that he's making contact. He does not chase. That's good. The max EV is good. I don't know that he's playing his way into everyday role. So I'm going to probably have to go back out there with my pennies and see who I can pick up.
It's the most wonderful time of the year.
Juan Yepes, please come back up.
Sneak players back onto your roster for a couple of bucks as you get through the last couple rounds of Fab. A couple mailbag questions to get to. This one comes from Isaac. How can I untrain myself to avoid older pitchers? In the rates and barrels parlance, I never end up with solid veteran oatmeal pitchers because I have this notion that because they're older, they're more likely to miss time due to injury. I lean toward younger hitters as well, but I always sprinkle in a good share of Odie bats. Are there any benchmarks that either of you know of around velocity or command or even injuries that I can use to help me feel better about taking older arms? So what would you tell Isaac, anybody else out there that tends to avoid pitchers? I'm assuming probably on the wrong side of 30, but especially the 35 and over pitchers, which has actually been a pretty decent group. If you look at expectations, like it seems like the market correction on those players leaves a good bit of room for profit.
I did find late last year, that the ratio of older pitchers, which was over 33, to young pitchers under 24, was better than ever was, and in favor of the older ones. And I think that what's happening is that teams are just being cautious, breaking guys in as younger pitchers. And so you're seeing all these strategies like, hey, we're going to start him out in the pen, or he's going to be a 4-inning guy, right? Like these 3-4-inning guys. And think about the Rays, how they break starting pitchers in. So I think people are kind of slow walking it at the beginning, and then near the end, they don't care as much about innings anymore, right? They're not like, "Ooh, we need to baby his arm," right? And nobody cares. Wainwright doesn't have a innings limit, So they just they throw those guys out there, and then also you've sort of proven your abilities at a certain point when you're older. And the last thing I want to say is that stuff is not. People think velo is stuff, but stuff is more than velo. And if you looked at stuff and pitching plus for Adam Wainwright, it was fairly bullish on him coming into the season. So I would just say, if you've got an older starting pitcher like a Corey Kluber or Adam Wainwright that looks good still by stuff plus, I think a lot of times it's pitching plus, and they still have command on a lot of pitches. That's sort of where I'd look. But I would just say an older starting pitcher like a Wainwright or a Kluber makes for a fine late draft pickup. And I've been trying to sprinkle those guys in late in my drafts all the time.
Yeah, I've been trying to get rid of the old but doesn't strike a lot of guys out biased. I'm so far away from Wainwright each of these last couple of seasons that's a blind spot for me. That's the part of this
I didn't have a ton of shares, but I have a more than a few shares of Kluber, and I think he's comparable.
Yeah, tracking in that direction. Thanks a lot.
I end up with some shares of Verlander even too.
Verlander and Scherzer are just they're on. But I wasn't afraid of Darvish either. I think there were people that didn't want Darvish, so I
think the question is really more about injury risk, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Scherzer has shown that. Verlander may be in his honeymoon phase, but and Yu's been mostly healthy this year. I think he's been on the IL once, but
yeah, pretty healthy group of older pitchers.
Do want to mix your risk around. If you like, you wouldn't go all old. That would be weird. Then you'd probably have some moment where you just have 5 starting pitchers on the IL. You know,
I do wonder if the time that an old pitcher loses to injury offsets any difference between how that pitcher is treated versus how the young pitcher is managed with kid gloves. Like, you're going to lose those innings, either old guys because they got hurt or young guys because the teams are trying to keep them from getting hurt and they still get hurt anyway.
I mean, the reason we pick pitchers in the first 5 rounds is because they're in that sweet spot where we think we can get 180 innings out of them. They'll be good and they won't get injured.
Not old and not getting kid gloves treatment.
Yeah, and then everyone on the other sides is you pick those guys later.
Be 27. That's the answer if you're a pitcher. No, but really, just do what you can to trust the numbers behind these players because they're legitimately good, even if they're not lighting up the radar gun quite the same way that they used to. Thanks for that question.
Age, like a thing you look at a little bit later in the process, you know.
Hide that column maybe if you have to.
Right, yeah.
OJ writes in with a question that might seem odd at first blush. Is it actually a good thing to throw 24 strikes in a row? Sure, you'll avoid walks and throw fewer pitchers, but don't you want batters chasing non-strikes if you're going to succeed long term? Can any pitcher maintain sufficiently elite stuff to always be hitting in the zone? Hope you're avoiding pickleball injuries. From OJ. I think this is inspired by George Kirby's outing on Wednesday, right? George Kirby was just filling the zone with strikes, and that's kind of what George Kirby does. But is there something to this? Is there a point where you can actually be in the zone too much, even if your stuff is pretty good?
Yeah. It's a philosophical question. I mean, the answer is yes, it's a bad thing if you have worse stuff than Kirby. Tyler Glasnow, the big thing that happened with the Rays is he got one target and it was high in the zone and he's throwing everything at that target. And so theoretically, everything he's trying to throw is in the zone. But he also has some of the best stuff in the big leagues. Like you could I think Spencer Strider would be the guy to kind of watch. Like, could Spencer Strider just get one target for down the middle? And how would he do? Hunter Green is the answer to what you're saying, though. Hunter Green has, I think, top 5 fastball stuff, at least among starters. He's got an excellent fastball. And early on this season, he was throwing it dead red down the middle. And it wasn't working. So there's that interplay of stuff in command where, yes, in the zone, but on the corners, like Kirby, good. In the zone, high stuff in the middle will hurt you eventually. As good as his fastball was, Hunter Green's, he was giving up homers. And then there's also the third caveat. I'm the king of waffles, therefore I will waffle. The third caveat is how many pitches do you have? If you are filling up the zone with 3 different pitch types, that's a lot different than Hunter Green throwing too many fastballs down the middle. So I think theoretically you can live with a high zone rate if you had 3 pitches and you had great command and you were throwing it to different parts of the zone.
Yeah, because I mean, I'm looking at a zone contact percentage leaderboard, and if you go down to 80 innings pitched, just to kind of keep the relievers out of it, 128 pitchers qualify. George Kirby tied for 35th. That'd be tied for
highest or lowest?
35th lowest.
Okay.
So 25th percentile ish, in a good way, and generally
75th percentile. But
yeah, 75th percentile. Yeah, that's the correct way to use percentile.
I would say stuff is, for a starting pitcher is about average. So he's overplaying his stuff by having great command there.
It is funny. It's a funny list because it's
But
mostly
do it by
good
zone
pitchers.
percentage.
Just zone percentage. Who's in the zone the most? Oh, that's interesting. Old guy, struggling pitcher, then Kirby. Who do you think the two old guys are?
It's like Marco Gonzalez. Is that struggling pitcher?
He's not the struggling pitcher.
Oh. Is it Wainwright?
It's not. It's Rich Hill at number 1.
Wow.
Yu Darvish at number 2. Then Dylan Bundy, and then George Kirby.
Yu Darvish is interesting because he does not have good command, but he has a lot of pitch types. So he's throwing all of his pitch types towards the zone.
Right. And if you have 5, 6, 7, 8, I don't know how many pitches Yu Darvish actually has at this point, a lot. Hitters have to guess. Stuff's going to move late. You're going to avoid
Rich
the
Hill
barrel.
is the Tyler Glass now. I know it's weird to say that because Rich Hill throws like 88. But Rich Hill is the Tyler Glass now thing where it's like, I have a high stuff thing. I'm just going to throw in the zone. I don't have any command.
Yeah. There's some interesting names on this list because it goes Hill, Darvish, Bundy, Kirby, Framber Valdez, right? Tons of ground balls. That's fine. He needs to be in the zone. Chris Bassett, Brady Singer.
Most of these guys
Steele,
have good command, I think.
Sean Manaea.
Yeah, I think this is mostly a good command list.
Julio Urias. Logan Gilbert.
Yeah.
Shohei Ohtani. Kyle Wright, Joe Ryan, Noah
Oh,
Syndergaard.
Ohtani is bad command. And Darvish is bad commandish too. But I think Ohtani is on the glass now one. Mostly just throw it towards zone. You got, high 90s stuff, splitter that comes off of it. He throws more high sliders than anyone, so Ohtani.
The other end of the leaderboard is kind of fun. If you flip it upside down, who's in the zone the least? Jose Quintana is in the strike zone the least. And I'm surprised that works.
That's not bad command. That's like, I don't trust my stuff.
I don't want to get hit. So
I'm just going to dance around the zone.
Corbin Burns is number 2.
I think that's bad command.
Zach Davies doesn't trust the stuff. Martin Perez.
There's some soft tossers who don't trust their stuff.
Dylan Cease.
That's bad command.
So Burns and Dylan Cease are the good pitchers that are not in the zone as often as everybody else. This other guy, David Peterson, Ian Anderson, Dane Dunning, Chris Flexen, Paul Blackburn. It's a lot of guys that you don't really want.
Soft tossers don't trust their stuff. Command is confidence on some level. That's what a lot of pitchers will say. Season, there's a little bit of risk there with Cease and Burns where it's like, what if hitters decided to take a really patient approach with those guys?
I think the counter adjustment, if you had the ability to do it, if you're Corbin Burns, you'd throw more first pitch strikes. You'd go throw in first pitch cutters. And
and
guys would look for
so many sliders now. You'd throw sliders in the zone, I guess.
So that'd probably be their adjustment. But thanks a lot for the question, OJ. One last email that came in was actually a follow-up response. We had a league that was talking about locking teams out of making moves at the end of the season, the non-contending, the non-playoff teams. So we have another listener who's in a keeper league. It's a head-to-head league. And what they decided to do was add a loser's bracket. So that way, everybody who wasn't in the playoffs could be in the loser's bracket, and they would be able to win back half of their entry fee. And that kept the league a lot more active throughout the entire second half. As a head-to-head league, it kept teams trying in July and August when they might even drop off in a regular season matchup. So that seems like a pretty good workaround. I
really like that. The other one that I've liked, my friend had a basketball league that we did where it's a graded pay in, pay out scale. So first place wins a bunch, second place wins last, third place wins last, but also third to last pays more and second to last pays more and last pays the most. And so you're fighting to stay out of the bottom because you don't want to pay more.
Yeah, no, I do. I'd like that. I've got a league that I'm in that plays that way too, where you pay a penalty for being extra bad. As long as you know people are good for the money, that's a great way to set up.
Also, you could kind of do the math where it ends up being the same. Where it's like, okay, if I'm fifth, I don't pay an entry fee. You could have a league where fifth place gets your money back.
Yeah, you could just collect all the money up front and then pay back everyone, including the team that took well, not the team that took last, but just
everyone gets paid back a little, and then you can still take the money up front and do it that way. In our league, we did the more dangerous thing where we settled up at the end of the year. That's dangerous because people can leave.
It's just extra work for the commissioner to track people down. I don't think, for the overwhelming majority of people that play in a league together that know each other, I don't think it's that you have legitimate flight risks in your league. It's just more like a hassle to pester that one or two.
Yeah, because the season's over. They're not thinking about it anymore.
Yeah, they're just busy. Like,
but the flip side of it was that you can actually make it sort of a payment from person to person. So last basically sends a check to first.
Make the winner go collect the money from dead last.
No, that's awful.
I'd
avoid that.
Thank your commissioner. Consider tipping your commissioner if you get a long-term commissioner.
Tip your commissioner.
Just you might as well send the commissioner coffee or beer or whatever it is they like, because it's a thankless job. Thanks for that email, Dan. Lots of great questions today. Feel free to keep sending those in. Rates and barrels at theathletic.com is the email address, so you can tweet at us. Eno's at Enosaris. I am at Derek Van Riper. You can also leave questions under this video on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Like this video if you're watching us there. As always, we appreciate any and all great reviews that you'd leave us for this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any other player or platform that allows you to rate and review the show. That is going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We are back with you on Monday.
Thanks for listening.